leave my screen off. Thank you so much. Good morning. Welcome to the July 2nd work session of the McMinnville Water and Light Commission. To call the meeting to order and ask the clerk to do a roll call.
Yes, Mayor Dropkin.
Here.
Commissioner Tate.
Here.
I just clicked Commissioner Tankersley into the room. Commissioner Tankersley. Be quiet off mute yet. I'll come back to that. Commissioner Gormley.
Here.
Commissioner Christensen.
Here.
And Commissioner Tankersley, are you with us?
Here.
Oh, got it.
Sorry.
Okay. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, let's go ahead and get started.
Okay, I guess that's my cue. Good morning, Jamie Phillips, Power Resource Manager, and here to talk with you this morning on some power supply topics. I think these work sessions are designed to cover a variety of topics and provide detailed information to the Commission to inform future power supply contract decisions that are in our near future. Today, I'd like to focus on our BPA power supply, particularly the existing contract we have with BPA, and then the proposed provider of choice contract for post-2028 power service, with some particular attention to the contract high watermark calculation. I'd like to spend the majority of time on that, with reserving a few minutes toward the end of the meeting to touch on the RPS memo that was included in your packet as a follow-up to some questions from last month's meeting, and then also to take a few minutes to hear feedback and touch on next steps. So we'll just get right into it. Oh, I'll also mention in call to order, there's a variety of resources and reference materials that we're sort of building a library there for you to refer to. There's definitions, acronyms. It's a working list, so it'll be added to as we go, as things come up. And there's some other supplemental documents there for your perusal if you're so interested. Next slide. Okay, so as we know, BPA is central to our regional power supply and transmission service, providing about 28% of power and 75% of the transmission grid in the Northwest. And BPA's mission, authorities, and business model are all defined in statutes. And I'd like to highlight a couple of these statutes quickly to provide some context. And these statutes are really the foundational elements of BPA's power service to the Northwest. So first is the Bonneville Project Act, which in 1937 established BPA as a marketer of the federal dams, and directed the administrator to give preference and priority to public bodies, to consumer-owned utilities like McMinnville, and then limiting contract lengths to 20 years. So that feeds into our current agreement. Secondly is the Pacific Northwest Electric Power Planning and Conservation Act, which we often refer to as the Northwest Power Act. And that further defines sort of the contracting requirements for BPA to offer power to consumer-owned utilities, reinforcing that preference concept, and then sets out some rate-making procedures, residential exchange, and then energy efficiency, fish and wildlife, among other things. But key here is that idea of preference. Next slide. So we'll dive into that a little bit more. So preference means, and we'll often use that term when referring to our power supply with BPA, and that is outlined in the statutes and does provide public utilities in the Northwest statutory preference to the power marketed by BPA. And when there's conflicts or there's competition for that power, preference customers are given priority. So we know that the federal hydro system is fully subscribed, and we as a public utility are entitled to a share of that power. Other key concept is net requirements, and that is explained in the Power Act. But it specifies that how BPA offers power to meet the firm load of consumer-owned utilities. And net requirements is a customer's entire net load, retail load, minus its non-federal resources. And so there's further detail on that in the Power Act, but often you'll hear reference to Section 5B or 5B9C of the Northwest Power Act policy, and that is really just reference to this net requirements obligation of BPA to provide power to consumer-owned utilities. Next slide. Okay, so that's we'll just fast forward to today. We have a long history with BPA, taking power from them since the 40s. The current power contract is often referred to as the regional dialogue contract. That is a result of a whole process engaging with the Northwest utilities to develop the current long-term power sales contracts. And the shift in the kind of framework of the contract really was a result of the energy crisis, among other things, but the energy crisis in the early 2000s, which where BPA kind of overcommitted contract rights of firm power and wasn't able to meet consumers' needs, and rates skyrocketed. And there was this realization in the region, and particularly from public utilities, that there was a need to look at it a little differently. And so tiered rates came in, or a tiered system came into existence. And that's allocating the existing capacity of the federal system, those 31 dams and the nuclear plant, to customers, and then additional power needs to be served at incremental costs, still by BPA if customers so choose, but at a marginal incremental cost. Regional dialogue contracts are 20-year agreements signed in 2008 for deliveries through 2028. It's a take or pay contract. We were required to pay for firm net requirements power. And again, net requirements is our total retail load minus our dedicated non-federal resources. So it's a commitment to purchase from BPA, whether or not we actually take delivery. The regional dialogue contract also established contract high water marks, which is that allocation of the federal system at Tier 1 rates. And that was based on fiscal year 2010 loads. Tiered rate methodology came along with the regional dialogue contract, and that is that rate design to tier the system and to sell the existing kind of federal system power at Tier 1 rates at cost, and then a Tier 2 rate reflects that marginal cost to purchase power that exceeds a customer's high water mark. Next slide. Okay, so some specifics about McMinnville's BPA power contract. It currently serves about 97% of our power needs. The remaining 3% coming from Grant County resources. We do purchase a load following product. What that means is that BPA is responsible for serving our entire load on an hourly basis, minus our dedicated resources, but that load following product ensures that we can meet our hourly energy and capacity needs. The this is critical because of the nature of our load, with the steel mill ramping up and down so quickly. We need that type of product. McMinnville's dedicated resources, our Exhibit A resources, as you might hear them referenced, our Priest Rapids and Wanapum projects that McMinnville has taken since the 60s, and Riverbend landfill. Now, Priest Rapids and Wanapum are considered existing dedicated resources because they were in place prior to 2006, and that's defined. And then Riverbend landfill is considered a new resource because it came online after 2006, and that just that distinction there just plays into how those resources are brought to load and the timing of that. So we'll kind of get into that later, but the Riverbend landfill as a new resource under regional dialogue is going to become an existing resource in the next contract, and it will reduce our high water mark. Current contract high water mark is 89.4 average megawatts. McMinnville's current load is around 83 to 84 average megawatts. So we have what we often refer to as headroom. We also have rate period high water marks under regional dialogue, which is that reallocation of the system every 2 years. So every 2 years, BPA forecasts the output of the federal hydro system, and allocates that to customers. And that has that will always be less than our contract high water mark. It will never exceed our contract high water mark. We also elect a short-term tier 2 product. We've made that election periodically throughout regional dialogue, and that is our option to take that product to serve our above high water mark load after using Riverbend. So if McMinnville if our load were to grow beyond our rate period high water mark, we would first bring Riverbend to load, and then the balance, if any, would be served by a BPA short-term tier 2 product, which is essentially a market purchase, and the price reflects that. Dedicated resources, or particularly our Riverbend resource, require us to purchase resource support services, which are a variety of services that firm and shape that intermittent nature of that resource and the variable nature into a flat annual block of power, and that's to meet BPA planning obligations. I should pause for a moment and see if there are any questions, or please feel free to interrupt me. I feel like I'm moving pretty quickly here. So next slide. So that gives you an idea of what we have now with our.
I think we have a couple people raising their hand. I see Kathy and Tom trying to unmute.
Okay, I can't see that, so I'll rely on you, Trina.
Okay.
Go ahead, Tom.
So, Kathy, go on. You go first.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just had a question on the slide before, slide 4. I just wanted to know what the definition was of non-federal load. So the net requirements is the total retail load minus non-federal resources. What's non-federal resources?
Okay, so a non-federal resource is anything that is a customer resource outside of the BPA product. So Riverbend is a non-federal resource. Grant County is a non-federal resource.
Okay.
So it's anything aside from the federal Columbia River power system.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
So a quick question, and if you're going to get into this in more depth later, let me know and we'll just skip it right now. But on the Riverbend resource, we talked about it briefly at the last meeting. Is it set in cement now that it will be an existing resource, or is there a deadline in 2026 for that cutoff like there was during the regional dialogue?
Right. So that deadline, or if it's part of our portfolio in 2028, then it rolls into the next contract as an existing resource. Now, we do have some options with Riverbend, which I would like to dedicate some time to discussing.
Okay.
I don't know that we'll get to that today. There's a lot to kind of work through there, but we have some choices on how we want to, what we want to do with that resource. And those choices all have pros and cons. There's a timeline for resource removal if we want to do that.
Yes.
And that is October 1st of this
Of this year?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I would like to talk about it, but let's do it on your schedule.
Well, I was hoping maybe we could spend the August work session on that topic.
Okay. If that'll give you guys time to make the decision, sure.
Yeah, we're still gathering information, and of course we have to consider waste management in this equation. So
Yes.
trying to get their input and kind of see where they are on all of this, and then kind of calculate out the impacts both to our high water mark and rate impacts of that resource versus a tier 2 product that would have to replace it.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much.
Remy gave a thumbs up to dedicating the August work session to that topic also.
Okay. Okay, I'll move on then. Yes, slide 6. So I'd like to provide you some information on the provider of choice contracts, and this is the effort to serve power beyond 2028, and some of the core elements. So we can compare and contrast to what we have now and know what to expect going forward. Many of the elements are very similar. BPA will commit to serving a customer's net requirements as they're required to do by statute. They'll retain a tiered rates construct. Going forward, that rate design is called they've retermed it the public rate design methodology, but essentially similar to the tiered rate methodology. The BPA will establish a fixed system size, which is that capability for tier 1 power at 7,250 average megawatts. They'll do that at the beginning of the contract, and it will remain at that level for the duration of the provider of choice contracts. There will be contract high water marks, and they will be set using 2003 actual loads, subject to a variety of adjustments, which we'll get into in a moment. BPA is proposing, or they're eliminating the rate period high water marks. So that contract high water mark that we get at the beginning of the provider of choice will persist through the duration of the contract term. Tier 1 product offerings are very similar. Load following block, slice block. McMinnville will need, for reasons I stated earlier, will need to take a load following product. And then tier 2 product offerings also pretty similar, with a long-term product, short-term product, and a vintage product, which is really just specific to a certain resource. And we will also have further discussion on those options. The most conservative and kind of lowest risk option there is the long-term tier 2 product. BPA will continue to provide the environmental attributes to customers of the federal power, and that will be conveyed via REC, renewable energy certificate deposits. Conservation program will continue. And the term of the contract will go through September 30th, 2044. So 16 years of power deliveries. Next slide. Oh, I see a hand.
I'm sorry, I'm not finding a place to like raise my hand on the screen. I don't know why. Anyway, could you just clarify or tell me on the fixed system size and the contract high watermark? You said both of those are going to be set at the start of the contract and then not ever change for the entire length. Is that correct? So 20 years or 19 years. Is that right?
That's right.
And so how is that that's different than the last contract? I mean, the last contract there was adjustments. Is that correct?
So currently we have rate period high watermarks. Yes, that's correct. So at the beginning of our current contract, we were given a contract high watermark, which is the maximum that we could purchase at tier 1. But every 2 years, BPA makes a hydro projection. They project how much output the system will generate, and they reallocate that as a rate period high watermark using the same methodology as a contract high watermark, that proration. But going forward, BPA has committed to a system size of 7,250. So it's not going to fluctuate every 2 years and be adjusted by rate period high watermarks. The size will be set at 7,250, and McMinnville will receive an allocation of that via our contract high watermark, and that will persist through the whole contract term.
And this is because they're at full capacity in their mind. So in the next 20 years, they're not expecting to add any capacity to the system. Is that basically what they're saying?
So there are some opportunities for adjustments, and customers have pushed for BPA to commit to either off ramps or, when that system size changes. We've seen an effort recently for dam removal, which would drastically change the output of the system. But if BPA commits to 7,250, then they have to go acquire resources to backfill that resource loss at whatever cost, and customers are then obligated to pay those costs. And so there's been an enormous effort from customers to mitigate that risk, provide some certainty with resource loss or resource additions too, that it works both ways. So that is still a little bit in the works, but that 7,250 is the level that BPA, after a lot of customer engagement and back and forth, that's the level that they were willing to commit to for the contract term.
Okay, thank
you.
you.
There's always going to be caveats to that. So
yeah. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Jamie, this is Ed. Early on, one of the first slides, you talked about our load at, I think, 89 point something. Is that correct?
That's our current contract high water mark.
Okay, so how does that equate to 7,250?
It's a little over 1%. It's about 1.15%.
Okay, so they're not chopping us back. We're continuing to get what we need.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, Ed, I misunderstood. That equates to the current hydro system at about 1.2%. The 7,250 as compared to today. So the current capability or system size is around 6,900 average megawatts for this rate period, and that fluctuates, like I said, every rate period. But so the hydro system, that firm output usually hovers around 7,000 average megawatts. But there's a couple other things at play. BPA is committed to augment the if the hydro system doesn't generate 7,000 of firm capability, they're going to augment with purchases up to, that 7,250. There's also on the table, the Columbia Generating Station, the nuclear plant, is planning an uprate. So they're making some investments in their operations there to increase the output of that facility by over 100 average megawatts. So that will add to that firm capability of the system.
So when you say system capacity, we're talking about the Bonneville system, then we're not talking about McMinnville. We're talking about the global system. Okay.
That's correct. The
That makes,
federal
okay,
hydro.
I understand that better. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, next slide. So a little more about the contract high watermark under the provider of choice agreement. BPA will calculate the contract high watermarks to set the customer's maximum eligibility to purchase power at tier 1 rates. Each customer has a unique high watermark based on their load history. And that, like we've discussed, that contract high water mark will be set for the entire provider of choice contract period. Those calculations will take place in fiscal year 2026. And this is important because that's after the commission will be asked to sign a BPA contract. BPA is anticipating contract offers at the end of 2025. So while we have pretty good indication of where our contract high water mark will be, there's a small element of uncertainty there, but I think it's pretty limited. BPA recognizes that that may cause some discomfort with customers signing a contract and not knowing what their high water mark is, because that high water mark, then if it's not sufficient to meet a customer's load, prompts a need to purchase other resources and to make commitments to other resources that to serve above high watermark load. And often those need to be done years in advance. So the timing is a little sticky, but that's what BPA has said they're going to do. That's really not, after pushback and discussion and things, that's where we settled. So BPA will use the index year of fiscal year 2023, which is October of 2022 to September of 2023. So they'll use those actual loads in the contract high watermark calculation. And they'll also normalize that calculation for weather, which has not been done yet. And I'm going to get into the calculation here in a minute. I want to just mention that there's still some weather normalization and tweaks to this calculation. So it is very much a draft. So
We have a question.
Sure.
Kate.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to clarify then. Is it fair to say that with this new contract for the next 20 years that every public entity that's a preferred provider is basically going to be on the hook for whatever excessive growth happens in their system to buy extra power, right? I mean, it's basically Bonneville is, I mean, this is basically saying Bonneville cannot take care of future growth for any preference customer that they have. I mean, we have a small bit of headroom, and then after that, if we bring extra, businesses or extra things in that use a lot of power, we're just know that we're going to have to pay for like tier 2 rates, or is that fair to say?
Well, so BPA still has a commitment to and an obligation to supply our power needs. It's just the rate and the product that they do that with. So the rate at which we buy it. So as a preference customer, BPA has to serve our load under the statutes.
But
what this is saying is that the amount of that load that they can serve at a tier 1 rate is set. Anything above that, we would have to opt for either a BPA tier 2 product, which means they provide it, likely at a higher rate, or non-federal resources. And we have, you know, we currently have Riverbend that will become an existing resource in the next contract. So yeah, it is, BPA still has to serve our load. It's just at what rate?
Yeah, I was just thinking about if we had a new customer come in that was, you know, like the steel mill or somebody who needed a large amount of power, and we're looking at setting rates. You know, we have to think about how do we set a rate for somebody in the future that's coming in with a large load, can't really fit into our current, you know, rate structure. And so I think just thinking about what that looks like. So thanks for
Yeah.
the clarification.
Yes, you're welcome. And I would offer that a customer of, you know, significant size would likely be, we would want to serve them via a contract.
Right.
We could
Right.
negotiate that.
So we have to figure out where that cutoff is for serving them as with a different rate within our retail system and having another contract with somebody. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great questions.
Okay. Thank
All
you.
things on my mind. Yes. Okay. So our priority firm PF eligible load. So that's load that Bonneville has to serve as a priority, to priority customers at firm power. That's our total retail load minus new large single loads, and minus dedicated resources. McMinnville doesn't have any new large single loads in this calculation. And the dedicated resources amounts are based on fiscal year 2023, just as the actual load data is. And then also mention here that, so that this applies to McMinnville in the form of Riverbend. So currently in our Exhibit A, our resources in our BPA contract, McMinnville temporarily removes Riverbend from our calculation because we don't currently need it to serve our load. It's still there. It's still available if we need it. It just, BPA recognizes that that our load doesn't require it yet. So it's just a little detail there. Next slide. Okay, so here is the calculation, and this is a lot. I'm going to try to step through it methodically here, but it can get a little jumbled. So our contract high water mark is equal to our base allowance minus a headroom adjustment, plus a conservation adjustment, plus a new resource adjustment, load growth adjustment, and a proportional share adjustment. McMinnville's not taking all of these adjustments. We don't qualify for them all, but that is the entire calculation, and the details of each component are listed below. The base allowance is our 2024 rate period high water mark. The headroom is that difference between our rate period high water mark and our eligible load in 2023. And then BPA is offered to add back 50% of self-funded conservation. McMinnville does not have any. Our conservation program has been entirely funded by BPA's environmental or energy efficiency incentives. They've also included 50% adjustment, an adjustment of 50% of the new specified resources back to the calculation. So that applies to McMinnville in the form of the Riverbend resource. And then any load growth, we haven't seen that. And then the proportional share adjustment is allocating if there's any remaining energy up to that 7,250 average megawatts, BPA will allocate that to customers proportionally until they reach that ceiling of 7,250. Not sure that that's likely, but if it is, McMinnville would get a share of that. Next slide. Okay, so here's McMinnville's specific calculations. I see a hand.
Jamie, real quickly, please. The headroom adjustment is for the 2024 headroom or a different time?
It's for 2024. Well, it's the difference between our 2024 rate period high watermark and our PF eligible load. So our load after our dedicated resources.
So we should have been telling customers to waste power this year, right?
Well, for purposes of increasing our high watermark calculation, sure, but I don't know.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so again, 2023 is the index year for actual loads. No new large single loads, and our dedicated resources are here. So McMinnville's total retail load in 2023, sorry, was 84.2 average megawatts. That's what we actually used and purchased. Minus our two resources, the 2.94 is Grant County and the 4.02 is Riverbend. Gets us to our PF eligible load of 77.2 average megawatts. And then that flows into the calculation down below, where essentially it equals, it's that 77.24 that's deducted from our rate period high watermark to get that headroom adjustment. So base allowance is our rate period high watermark, which is 88.18 currently, minus our PF eligible load of 77.24 gives that headroom adjustment of 10.94. That's that available tier 1 that we're not currently, or we didn't use in 2023. The new specified resource adjustment, again, is for Riverbend, and that's that 2023 resource amount of 4.02 average megawatts times 50%. So that will be an upward adjustment to our contract high water mark of about 2 average megawatts. And then that proportional share adjustment is just, it's too uncertain to include. So essentially based on these numbers today and what we know at draft, high watermark for the next contract is 79.25 average megawatts. And you're probably wondering how that compares to our current load. And it, again, last year our load was 84 average megawatts. So you see that we are now consuming all of our tier 1 allocation and provider of choice and moving to a tier 2 product. Tom?
Excuse me, Jamie, real quickly. I think I remember seeing from a previous slide that there was an adjustment for conservation that we've done. Is that included in this number?
So that adjustment is for self-funded conservation. So conservation measures funded by the utility, and McMinnville didn't have any of that. And it was for a specific range of years. And all of our program costs were covered by BPA's energy efficiency incentive dollars.
Great. Thank you.
So no, we don't qualify for that adjustment. Okay. Any questions on the calculation? Okay, next slide. So this is a timeline of kind of where we are in the contract process with BPA. I will mention, I kind of left you hanging there on that contract high water mark. I would like to have future discussions regarding how we serve our above contract high water mark load, tier 2 product, non-federal resources. Just too much there to dig into in the time we have today. I'd like to dedicate another work session to that. So we'll come back to that, but that gives you some background on how it's calculated and our position going into provider of choice with our high water mark. So we're continuing through this policy implementation and contract development phase with BPA. Currently in these phase 2 workshops where we're they're drafting the language and we're negotiating provisions. We being customers and trade associations, and then those draft contract templates will get finalized by next February and released in March. And then there will be a comment period, updates, and more workshops next summer, spring, summer, to hopefully get to final contract templates in June. And then there will be a negotiation process. And BPA will prepare individual contract offers for customers to hopefully be executed by the end of calendar year 2025. Okay. So I have just whizzed through that, I feel like. Happy to revisit any of the concepts or topics. That kind of wraps up what I had planned for that subject matter today. Again, I'll mention the reference documents in your call to order application. There's some fact sheets and definitions and different materials. The Power Act is in there. Great reading. Highly recommend. And then next slide, Trina. So some topics for future work sessions.
Kathy has her hand raised.
Oh, sorry. Kathy.
I finally found out how to raise my hand, now that we're almost done. So I just want to clarify. I mean, to me, it feels like as this process moves along towards getting a draft contract for us to eventually agree on, a lot of the components of this are being set in stone, sort of, through the process of the people that are currently at the table. So the customer representatives and the associations and other people that are doing the negotiations with BPA. So as a commission, it seems like we have a few places along the way where we might make some decisions that are going to impact some of the parts of this contract, like we talked about the extra resources like Riverbend and what we're going to do with that. But in a whole, it feels like by the time we get to the point where we're presented a draft contract to sign, it doesn't feel, I mean, is it fair to say we don't really, by that time in 2025, we're not going to have a lot of negotiation power one-on-one with BPA, right? I mean, this is all getting sort of negotiated out as one big joint agreement between all the public power customers and BPA, right? Is that fair to look at it like we can make a few key maybe decisions along the way on this contract on our own part, but at the end, when we get a draft from them, there's not going to be much room to have any more discussions. Is that fair?
I would say that's fair. The contract framework and the policy was all adopted in March with the provider of choice policy, which was the result of years of conversations and back and forth with customers. And so that provider of choice policy really holds the fundamentals of the contract. Now, yes, there are going to be utility specific things that we can discuss with BPA. There's some choices to be made regarding our above high water mark load service, whether that's a BPA tier 2 product or non-federal resources. And within those BPA tier 2 products, there's options. There's some discussion and decision to be made regarding, as Tom mentioned earlier, our contract with Waste Management, and that which expires in 2030. So there's some decision points there, which will be the topic of the next work session. So yeah, you're entirely right, Kathy. The majority of it is already decided. As far
Yeah.
as the policy, the framework, kind of the foundational elements of a contract.
Okay, thank
Mm-hmm.
you.
Jody?
Yeah, so I think two things that Kathy said. One, just previous, it sounds like we have maybe places where we can have discussion, but it's going to be set in stone. And two, her previous remark about capacity to bringing, if we had a new industry locate in McMinnville, I think for me, the critical part for the commission that we need to dedicate significant time on is how we are prepared for that eventual activity coming to it will happen, right? We've got a pretty long runway with this contract. We've got a very large industrial site out on Highway 18. We've got limited but sites in the industrial park. I'm concerned about our ability to continue to grow our portfolio of businesses in this community. So I think that I would appreciate, as you think about how to engage with the commission moving forward, guidance on what we should be thinking about. And I'm thinking, let's take the water and light long runway. Like, how should we be thinking about this from a 20-year perspective, so that we're putting effort into making sure that we're not closing the door to business. But thank you very much for this presentation. I always appreciate the detail and your definition of the alphabet soup of everything. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Jody,
Yeah.
Jody, maybe to your question, we're not alone in that issue. I've been talking with both Forest Grove and Columbia River PUD, who both have large industrial sites that have this same issue. So, and it also ties into transmission capacity as well. So.
Tom?
So, in response to Jody, I agree completely. We need to think about that. And I think a lot of that is sort of what our tier 2 product is going to be and planning for that. So I think that's important. And then the second thing on Kathy's decision or question, I think theoretically we have an option of saying, well, we'll go somewhere else besides Bonneville. But I think that's super theoretical, because I don't think we have the time, or even if we had the time, I don't think there's any better deal than Bonneville anyway. So, but theoretically we have a decision there.
That's true. That's true. I wouldn't recommend that.
No,
but,
I wouldn't either.
But you're right. Yeah.
And Jamie, thank you very much. I thought that the materials were really helpful as a starter for this. And I thought the discussion was very good and very clear. This is a complicated subject, and I really appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
I'm just getting you warmed up, so more to come. I did hear, so on the next slide, I have some future topics for work sessions, and I did hear that regional resources and meeting that that demand for power is a big one. But I would also like to include the ones listed here, we touched on. So, and if there are other topics that the commission is interested in learning about and digging into, I'm happy to do that. So, if you found this format useful and helpful and understandable, we'll kind of continue this way. But if there's areas that you'd like different presentation style or seeing the information in a different way, please offer that feedback. I'd appreciate that. So with that, I just want to mention in the packet, there was a memo on our Oregon RPS obligation for McMinnville in 2025. And to summarize, I'll just touch on a few highlights here. So currently, McMinnville is under that 1.5% threshold. So that's 1.5% of the state's total energy sales. So we are classified as the smallest utility with the lowest RPS obligation in 2025 at 5% of our portfolio coming from renewable resources. So we currently meet that with the exemptions that the RPS allows, and those exemptions include not displacing a BPA contract, not displacing hydro resources, non-federal hydro resources, which is our Grant County, and then not displacing any other renewables, which is Riverbend. So until our load grows beyond those resources, we don't have an obligation. Now, there's a chart in the memo with some projections of our load and resources into the future for the next 20 years. And that does show an obligation starting in 2029. And that is primarily due to the new BPA contract and our high water mark going down. So, we're pushed into a tier 2 product, which is has a compliance obligation. So there's a lot of assumptions here. First of all, our load is as Kathy mentioned and we've talked about, we could see our load increase, substantially, and that's not projected here. What I have here is pretty moderate load growth, and then our number of RECs that are reflected here is our current balance at 828,000. To err on the side of being conservative, I did not include any REC accruals for the next 20 years to see if we could meet our obligation with what we have today. And you see there that the ending balance in 2044, with all of these assumptions, we still have RECs available. Now, with knowing that we are going to accrue more RECs, I don't see it being a challenge to meet our obligation. But again, that's based on what I know today. So I just want to take this snapshot for you of current situation and just detail our obligation. So that will likely change, but I'll keep you posted if it does.
Jamie, this is Ed. For our discussion in the future, going back to Jody's comment about Highway 18, if the situation with Bonneville and the ability to transmit is not changed, could we look at seeing what some generation on our own might do as far as the cost goes? So let's assume there's a big load out there and we have no ability to provide power because the grid is undersized. How are we going to accommodate that customer? And it could be that they're going to have to pay, whatever the rate is, just because of the situation. And I'm wondering, one of the things from my research previously is if you get rid of the thermal load, you've got there's a lot of money to be generated. So there could be some industry we attract that might use the thermal off, say a cogen plant or something. So if you could, or maybe John or one of you could tell us, how, what's the KW rate at which is this 13-cent power? Is this 25-cent power? Going into the future, is there any place that solar might help us out there, or is it just, the reality that if we want something out there, they're going to have to pay a lot more for the power because we have no ability to get the power out of the grid. Does that make sense to you?
That makes sense. And I will say, yeah, it's an issue, as John mentioned, facing the entire region with resources, generating resources, just building those and then getting them to a load center, which is the transmission part of the equation. So we can, pursue behind like utility resources behind the meter type things with loads. They can build things. It comes at a cost. And so, yeah, we have to weigh those options as they come and then continue this effort to push for resource development, resource adequacy in the region, and transmission. So it's unfortunately it's not a quick fix.
Yeah, so if you look at power, 20 years ago in the San Diego area, they were looking at 15-cent, 20-cent power today, maybe 25-cent power, and their growth hasn't slowed. They're going to keep going. So I mean, I think it would be nice. I've always asked John, okay, what's the number this week for, buying power out or what, generating your own, and how far off are we? So I just think it would be something good for us to know, because if we can't get power, the next best thing is for us to generate ourselves.
Right. Yes, and our integrated resource plan serves to kind of help guide these decisions. So that's helpful. I'll also mention that I have gotten an indication from BPA that our tier 2 price, because of the for the next rate period, is approaching $100 a megawatt hour.
Oh.
Because of the uncertainty of resource acquisition, and they're just that it's limited. The options are limited. So.
Okay, very good. And thank you again for the presentation today. It was great.
You're welcome.
Jamie, quick. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I would love to just follow up on what Ed's saying, and kind of what Jody's saying. If we were to set policy direction that focused on incentivizing local generation, whether that was, large scale residential solar or commercial solar or something else completely. But if we were to set that policy direction with keeping in mind that kind of, long-term need to support growth and development, I have two questions about that. One is, as we generated that power and put it back into the system, are we able to then purchase it back at the same rate versus needing to create our own storage? Or would we need to create our own storage? I think I got all the parts.
So any generation that would offset our load would just be, it would serve our load. Anything net of that.
So just offset. So we wouldn't need to, it would just be an offset. Okay. And then the second part is, would that then relate back to the RECs and what you were mentioning earlier with the conservation efforts, and that we don't currently have any conservation efforts directly coming from the utility? So would it kind of promote or support or assist us in getting some benefit in that way?
We are currently discussing ways that we can promote some self-funded conservation to capture more energy efficiency and reduce our load overall. So that is an option for us anytime.
Okay. Well, I would think that this should come back kind of as a work session, because that sounds like, an area where it would be good to have kind of official policy direction from the board. And so I would like, as you continue to build into these work sessions, I'd like to kind of focus on that as one of them. Thank you so much. And to your question about the formatting, I thought the formatting was great. Thank you very much. This was a great presentation.
Thank you.
Jamie, real quick, couple of quick questions. I think I remember that our industrial contracts make them responsible for their share of the RECs, and also make the industrial customers responsible for the tier 2 part. Because is that correct?
That's correct. So it's a pass through of tier 2 costs or any resource costs, but that pass through. And then yes, they are. So the industrial customers get an allocation of the tier 1 RECs we receive based on how much tier, and then, but as far as the obligation, that's on them. Now, McMinnville could offer to sell them RECs. Ultimately, it's McMinnville's RPS obligation, but our contract does stipulate that that cost is borne by the customer.
And is the tier 2 obligation of the industrial customers proportionate? Or I had this, for some reason, I have a vague recollection again that they were responsible kind of for all the tier 2 because we were allocating tier 1 to retail customers first.
So the tier 1 is allocated based on, so McMinnville's tier 1, the 89 average megawatts or whatever the rate period is, allocated based on the historic 2010 loads. So that allocation mirrors, the BPA's allocation, and any energy that the industrial customer requires above that allocation is their responsibility. Now, if there's excess tier 1 available, like from the distribution sector, there's a provision in the contract that allows for sharing of that, because BPA sees us as one customer that is under our high water mark. But if Cascade or Airgas is pushing beyond their tier 1 allocation, there's a sharing component in the and there's a financial calculation to reconcile that at the tier 2 price.
And so we're going to need to renegotiate our contract with the industrial customers based on what their share of the new high water mark is, right?
Well, that is up for negotiation, I suppose. But if it continues what we've been doing, that's correct. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do we need a motion to adjourn or?
Yeah, nope, sorry, I'm having trouble finding the mute button. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. This was fantastic conversation and great meeting and great presentation. I hope you all have a beautiful day, and the meeting is adjourned.
Okay, great job, Jamie.